This week on the OneCast, we're joined by Toyota Series Pro and FX3 Inc. Michael Johns to talk to us about Lake Norman and the Special Operations Bass Anglers Tournament.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Oh, God, it's a toad, son. It's a toad, dude.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.
Oh no! What is going on, folks?
What's going on?
Hey, if you're listening here, we're doing this a little ad hoc tonight. It's Trey and I in studio. Pete couldn't make it. Episode didn't drop last week because the one we wanted to use with Corey Johnson, the audio was just too bad with internet issues.
It's all right. The audio is too bad with internet issues, so we decided to not do that so you guys didn't have to painfully listen to that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and stuff like that. But
if you're interested, because Corey was talking about the new Bassmaster changes, so that is on our live. So you go on our Facebook page or on the YouTube channel. That live is there, Fishing Friday from the 6th. Now, what day was that?
It was 2 Fridays ago.
2 Fridays ago. Yeah. So you can go see that with Corey if you're interested. You just have to jump through when the audio isn't paused, but it is up there.
Yeah, sometimes we run into those issues. We try to do this as seamless as possible, but hey, you know what? It's just life. It happens. But you know what else happens? You guys need to head on over to OneCastFishing.com and use the code TheOneCast to save some money at checkout. I tell you right now, you're going to want to get your hands on those Nighthawks, the South African Special, the Green Pumpkin, the Hematoma. Like those colors are really clutch. There's another one too.
The Alabama Craw.
The Alabama Craw color, right? Now is the time that crawfish start coming out to play. It's a great flipping bait, and it catches a lot of fish. Also, you can get your hands on the weedless net heads. I caught a couple fish on Lake Norman with those. Those things are pretty clutch, especially when you pair them with like 8-pound tests and you're getting down there in 25 foot of water. Also, the apparel's there. All the snagless jig series. So the bladed version, the swim jig, the flipping, the football, the punching. Get your hands on all those things. Help out OneCast Fishing. They've been huge supporters of the OneCast. Not to mention, Ben, you're the owner of it, so we really appreciate it. So use the code TheOneCast at OneCastFishing.com. Save some money. Where else do they need to go?
Yeah, so at the same time, after you got stocked up for some fall and winter fishing, go over to your app store, whether that's your Apple store or your Play Store, I think is what the Google phones call it.
Mm-hmm.
Go over there and download the Deep Dive app. Take advantage of that free trial, but use that to be able to plan your time out in the water to help you identify the areas to fish. They just had an update with their wind feature. So we've talked about it where you can scroll back and back in time and forward in time with the wind and how that impacts the bank. They've updated their model, so now it includes wave action on the lake. So it was actually very interesting to see how a 7-mile-an-hour wind blowing from the southeast to the northeast and how that impacts the waves out in the middle of the lake. Mm-hmm. And just because of the terrain it's up against and how it will be slightly different. So on very windy days, if you're trying to get out of the wind or identify some areas that may be less difficult to fish, or maybe you want to target those areas because that's those fish or the shad's getting pushed up on those areas. It's a great tool, and they updated it for more information for us as anglers.
Yep. Check out Deep Dive. Great partners, man. Love their product. Also, head on over to CarolinaWatersNC.com. Use the code TheOneCast, just like at OneCast Fishing. Use the code TheOneCast to save some money on your UPF gear, right? Your UPF shirts. They got that new Buck Stopper shirt out. I'm going to be wearing that on Saturday because opening day gun season opens. They got your neck buffs. They got your gloves. They got all sorts of apparel, also for girls and boys, all sorts of things like that. We've been using their product for years now, and that helps you stay protected from those UV rays. So CarolinaWatersNC.com. Use the code TheOneCast. And then finally, also use the link that we always provide in the description, which is our Hobie Eyewear link, right? So HobieEyewear.com, use the link, just copy paste it or click on it, however it works. Go over there and look at all the different lines that they have for the sunglasses. They got floating frame, lifestyle frame. They got prescription sunglasses. My whole family's outfitted with them. We've been using them all year long. Specifically at Lake Norman, there were some overcast on days, so I was rocking the Sight Masters. And then on other days when it was a clear water, I was looking at the copper green lenses and things like that. So those guys do a really good job at creating a product that's very, very affordable and it's even more affordable when you use the link. You're going to get like $100 and something pair of glasses for like $83, right? Comes in a nice case, has a glass cleaner or has glass cleaner with it. If not a glass cleaner, it's got a little sleeve that the glasses go in. So they do a really good job at making a product affordable for you guys. Awesome. And I introduced this episode by saying Michael, which is funny. So we're going to bring Mike on here in a minute. There are a couple updates. I think we talked about it before. On the Bassmaster side of the house, everyone's tracking that there's no entry fees anymore. If you're not, go back, listen to that episode with Corey on Facebook and stuff like that. You know, Rick Clunn has announced his retirement. Frank Taller's retiring. And now Clark Winlet. Right. So Clark Winlet is retiring from the Bassmaster Elite Series. So you got 3 OGs walking away, making some room for these new guys to step up. And the next 9 that are coming into the elites, the other guys better watch out. We said that last year, and it proved true. And then this year they got 9 more hammers, two veterans, right? Cody Meyer and Dakota Eber. So really interested to see that. The MPFL has their final event coming up here at Lake Murray in December. Really excited for that because I think we're going to pop down there for potentially maybe one of the days for the weigh-in and stuff like that. So good luck to all the MPFL anglers fishing Lake Murray. And then I'm not really sure what else is going on.
The only other update was MPFL announced their one of their tournaments that had to be determined. I think it might have been in July 1 or August, but it's at St. Lawrence, if I remember.
That's right. Yep. Up north. So, but without further ado, let's bring on Michael, aka Mike Johns.
Mike Johns
from Georgia, who is the founder and owner of FX3, who we promote all the time, who focuses on supporting veterans in the outdoors and suicide awareness. Mike came up here and fished his second Special Operations Bass Angler tournament with us this year. And so we're going to talk about that. So let's have Mike jump on here, man, and see how you're doing.
Hey, how's it going, man? Once again, honored to be on here. So the SOBA tournament, God, so many things changed from last year to this year.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
I didn't have the hammer bin in the boat.
I wasn't going to say that. The performance is a little different this year. Unfortunately, I had some things going on. I couldn't make it over this year, but I'd like to obviously next year because it was a great tournament last year. And I was following along with all the text message threads you guys had and the pictures. And I mean, it's a great event as always.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, so much had changed. Water was up about 4.5 feet from where we were there. Ben, I don't know if you remember that one point close to that hot dock where you caught that topwater spook bite fish.
There was that riprap there, right?
Yeah, it's all underwater.
Yep. Oh.
Yeah, so it was like 4 foot underwater. So that let me know that the water was up when I first. That was one of the first spots I checked. Actually, Trey tried to run me off of that spot on tournament.
That's not true. I don't even know where the hot dock is at. I think he knows where it's at. You know where it's at, Ben. Pete, I think he was able to shark it and figure out where it's at. But Mike's right. Before we get into day one of practice, I do want to kind of give everyone a background, just quickly to understand the SOBA tournament every year is designed to support in memory of a fallen special operations soldier. So, it's the annual Mark McCowan tournament. This year was dedicated to one of the Green Berets that was killed in Afghanistan. I believe last year it was for one of the chief warrant officers that passed away, saving his family in a house fire. So before the fishing even starts, you're already taking a trip for a great purpose. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Oh, 1,000%. And then listening to the story and then being able to connect with other veterans, some such as yourself, which I don't know how I hold that one up. But anyway, other veterans, and then hearing the story of who they're honoring every year is just phenomenal. I mean, it gets you emotional right before the tournament to just read about who they're honoring and what they do. So Nick and Kate and them over at SOBA do a wonderful, wonderful job honoring those guys after they've passed on.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. So we had the pleasure, and Mike, you can give your perspective on it. We had David Fuchs and his wife. We had Ed and Lisa drive down from New Jersey, which was a super humbling experience to have them travel all the way down to Jersey Mike drove all the way up from Georgia. Myself and Pete, we all stayed in a house together, and it was a blast.
Oh, well, yes, it was awesome. I mean, you get that many different personalities in the house. It really reminds you of being back in the military, because you got all different aspects and backgrounds under one roof, and it's all the crap talking we're used to in the military. It's all the camaraderie we're used to. And then, after a couple adult beverages, then you get the war stuff out, and really good time. I love it more and more every year.
Yeah, absolutely. So driving up from Georgia, you had, your experience on Lake Norman from last year. So talk about your day one of practice and how you, the things you noticed and the way you went about attacking day one of practice. Cause we had 2 days of practice before the tournament started.
Let's set it up a little bit before about how conditions were different this year.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about, and then Mike can talk about how, based upon history and change, because if you're living down the Southeast, or really pretty much in this country, except maybe like the Northwest, it's been really warm all fall long. So we had 80 degrees day, like a week or two before. It's been really warm. Of course, the hurricane affected Lake Norman in the sense there was a lot of mud that came through. The lake was blown out for a couple weeks. Norman's normally a clear lake. And
Yep.
We were talking with Seth and some other guys who'd been out there. I mean, it was just straight. That was Mikey.
Yeah. Mikey.
Yeah. Mikey, when we did Fishing Live Friday Live with him, it was all blown out. And so this year, I guess it was a little bit high. You guys can talk about the water clarity now, but very different conditions. And what was the water temp this year?
Yeah. So Mike and I were talking during practice or I think maybe when we got back to the house, but I had a picture of my graph from 2023. And at the time, the exact same time last year, the water temperature at its highest, I want to say was about that 59.8. At least that's what my back transducer was reading. What I noticed in practice, and Mike can probably second this, is that water temperature at its highest point got up to 71 degrees. Right now I'm fishing a very different, and I'll talk about the way I broke things down in my absolute horrendous practice, but the water temperature was around 11, 12 degrees warmer. Did you see the same thing, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we put in that morning at where we are going to launch from the tournament, me and you did. And then I immediately just went to areas that we had last year marked, like the hot dock and some riprap. And when I got to the hot dock, I was like, this brush pile was not in 23, 24 foot of water last year. And so I was like, man, what's going on? I was like, well, it could have shifted. Maybe, wind, currents, something shifted the brush pile. So you really couldn't tell that the water was different. Well, then when I went to the riprap, where Ben had caught the topwater fishing practice last year, and it's underwater. Like, I'm looking around for it, and I got a waypoint marked, and I'm like, riprap? There's no riprap around here. And I got to scoping around and then noticed it's 4 foot underwater. And I said, oh, that's it. The water level has changed.
Mm-hmm.
That changed 100% of how I was going to break the rest of the practice down. I did end up running up the river to where me and Ben caught them last year. And those stumps, Ben, were like 30 to 40 yards offshore instead of being hugged up close to where we caught them. And it was just muddy. So I abandoned the river pretty quick. Maybe in an hour and a half, I went ahead and said, no, this isn't going to be where it's going to be done. And then I just started graphing around and just started looking, started the breakdown process. And then I found a bridge run where they call Long's Island, and ended up catching a couple 4-pounders on a bridge and thought I had something figured out. But I learned that normal. And I learned later because I thought I stacked the deck this year, and I got a local hammer in the boat, a guy named Jared Jones who lives on Norman. And I was like, man, I'm going to stack the deck. He's going to show me where they are. And so I caught a couple 4-pounders by myself on Wednesday. I was like, man, this thing's over. And yeah, that was not the case. All the spots from last year were pretty much so different. They fished so different. I didn't get one bite on the willow vibe, which was real heartbreaking because I love that.
You just gave the juice out. You
So-
finally gave the juice out after a year.
For
Yeah.
those who don't know what a willow vibe is, it's made by Z-Man, and it's like the junior varsity version of a chatterbait, right? So Mike loves to throw that thing, and he does really, really well with it. It's got a little skinny blade.
It's a willow blade.
Yeah,
Willow leaf blade.
little willow leaf blade with a pretty light hook on it. But that thing absolutely catches fish, especially in a clear water fishery like Lake Norman, which isn't so clear.
Yes. And so after I threw it around for about an hour and a half with 0 bites, I kind of ended up throwing that off to the side. I was like, man, so now I got to regroup. What am I going to throw now? So then I was like, man, and that was another thing. We had completely bluebird skies. The wind wasn't blowing very hard like it was last year. No rain, even though I had my rain gear. That's why it didn't rain. So I just started targeting, shaded structure. And that's when I found the bridge pylons, caught like a 4-pound largemouth and like a 3.5-pound spot on like jerk baits and jigs. And so I was like, man, this is going to be all right. So then I come back down, talk to Trey, and I was like, well, first we had 40 phone calls and we couldn't talk to one another.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll give you my quick version. I was spinning out because I couldn't figure anything out, right? Like, I talked to Mike. I talked to Mike. Pete wasn't up there yet. And this is a Wednesday we're talking about. And same exact story that Mike was talking about, deep water, not as clear as it typically is. I did run history from last year, but I abandoned it very quickly and I just ran absolutely new water, but it still didn't matter. And the biggest reason is because of the dock talk. I really truly believe that dock, I was trying to practice something that I wasn't strong at. Right. And
what was the dock talk?
So the dock talk there for me, listening to locals, and we're not locals, right? Like Norman is 3 hours away from here. Clearly Mike's not a local, but he won the house last year. So he has the trophy, the figurative trophy for the house. And so, but nothing was working for Mike. Nothing was working for me. And a lot of people are talking about, you got to target the end of dredge docks and run as many brush piles as you can. Well, I'm sure that they're in the brush piles because I could see them on active target, but I could not get anything to bite. And then guys are saying, oh, they're really line shy. And I'm like, I don't understand how that is because the water's dirtier than it was before. So, I mean, I was doing what I normally do on a fishery like that, which is to look for the schooling bite. But like Mike said, it was completely different. We found some schooling bites, but they weren't like schooling like Norman fish do. And I really attribute that to the water level and the water temperature. So my day one of practice was absolute garbage. I was in my own head and I was trying to run stuff that I wasn't comfortable with. So I'll turn it back over to Mike on day one of practice.
I don't even think you were in your own head. Trey just had an attitude. I'm sending him fish.
I did.
And he's getting aggravated because they're not catching fish. And I'm big fish photos. And he's texting me back, where are you? And I'm being smart. Everybody that knows text with me, I'm not going to reply like exactly.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I'm in the water.
Yeah.
And so then Trey he calls me and it's like, where are you? And we couldn't talk. We tried to connect. So finally we decided to meet up in mid lake, or actually kind of northern lake, closer to Longs Island. And then I showed him what I was catching them on. And I haven't given away that juice yet. I'll wait till after next year's tournament before I talk about that. But so I showed him exactly what I caught, the bigger fish on the bridge pylons. Now you know the bridge, though. If you know the area, you know Longs Island, you know where that bridge is. That pylon's got some huge fish on it. Like,
they do.
Stupid big. Just could not. I could get them to chase a jerkbait every once in a while, and you'd watch them parallel the bait or get up under it and never commit. And very frustrating. But so we conversed, and then Trey's was spun out and just just left.
Well, I spun out and left because I knew exactly where Mike was fishing, and I'm not going to go fish where Mike is fishing, right? Like, even if it's a charity tournament, even if I'm trying to beat him in the house, I'm not going to go fish his water, right? We always talk about.
Did you go check other bridges?
I did go check other bridges, and then realized that it was not soon after that I was going to lose $10,000 worth of lead weights, right? Like, it was just going to, like, it was so gnarly down there, and I wasn't seeing, that's also not a strength of mine, right? Like bridge pylons, like I can fish them with a drop shot and stuff like that. But like what we were throwing at, like what I was trying to target them with was a really lightweight shaky head. You know, Pete's dad was in the boat with me. He kept breaking off, and I was like, this just ain't, it's not efficient, right? There's no efficiency, even if the big, and all it takes is 5, but I wasn't getting really any bites. And I ran a couple bridges, but I was like, well, you know, maybe they're just holding on one bridge in particular, which is the bridge I'm not going to go fish, right? I'm just not going to do that. So I ran around and did that. And then that pretty much, I mean, we caught, I think on a Wednesday practice, I think we caught like 2 keepers. I mean, we caught fish. Don't get me wrong. When they would bust, like you'd toss a little swim bait out there, catch one, it'd be like 12 inches or whatever. And mind you, there's no limit of spotted bass in the state of North Carolina right now, Alabama spotted bass. But for the tournament, it was a 14-inch minimum, 5 fish, obviously. So we weren't catching quality anywhere. So my day 1 of practice was absolute garbage. I'll let Mike finish off day 1 of practice here.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. And I'll tell you, they were finicky. I don't know about line shy, but it had to be a particular pattern. Like I had to literally drag the bait in between the pylons, hitting against rock and the bottom basins of the pylons to get strikes. So they were hugged up. It's bluebird skies. They were sitting as deep as possible. And yeah, I broke off a couple of times doing that because you're dragging it through sticks and brush piles and danger buoys and ropes and other people that's broke off. I can't remember how many pieces of line I pulled as much as I could out of the water and cut to get it out of the water on day 1 of practice. And yeah, man, that was something that was kind of opening my eyes. And I told Trey, I was like, man, I said, I found big fish, but I was like, man, you got to do a lot. Like, I mean, pretty much stand on there and cast upside down to get them to bite.
Well, before we move on to day 2 of practice, so was it day 1 of practice that you pulled that catfish up?
Oh, yeah. So
So what happened with that?
So day 1, I go to the riprap that we were just talking about, Ben, and I'm throwing a shaky head on the riprap, and I get a bite, set the hook, and I was like, man, it's pulling sideways. It's really big. Like I can't figure out what's going on. And then about that time, the fish jumps. I see it's a spot, and I'm like, why is it fighting so weird? So I get him out of the water, and I notice something attached to him. It's line, fishing line. And as I'm moving the line, I feel jerking in my hand, and I'm like, what in the world? I was like, did I just twofer on somebody else's fishing line? There's a fork in the water, and it's bobbing up and down, and it's got a catfish hook to it. So I caught a spot, a keeper spot, and a catfish on the same cast on 2 different lures. That's
insane. So where you throwing on any riprap, there's tons of fishing line busted off down there, but who would have thought in a million years, like you would have doubled up with a spotted bass and a catfish, dude?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
I send it to Trey, and I'm like, I doubled up, and I showed him the in the background and then the catfish in the cork, and I'm like, you'll never believe this.
Got to be the only time I've ever heard anyone doubling up on a shaky head. You know what I mean? So, but you got that catfish all freed up, and he was looking rough, you said, but then he swam away like a champ after that, right?
Yeah, so I sat there. I actually set him in the live well for a moment because you could tell he had been on that hook for a minute. He was on there so long. Actually, I'm surprised I got him in because the line was kind of rotting. It was breaking apart when I got him in the boat. And, of course, he had that hook for so long, he had swallowed it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, they're resilient. You can throw those things on the bank, and they'll squiggle their way back in the water. So that pretty much sums up your day 1 of practice, because at that point, you didn't pick up your local hammer until the day after, right? Till Thursday. So we all get back to the house. So I'll talk about some of the house stories. We all get back to the house. So Mike gets back, I get back, Ed, David, and their wives. And practice for them was the same for me. I don't think they caught a limit of keepers. Not that you were trying to sort them out there, everything, but if you know anything about Lake Norman, there's a bunch of tiny spotted bass in there. So you kind of do need to set the hook to see what kind of quality fish you're around. I think we were all fishing relatively different areas of the lake. Mike and I were kind of close, but the same story from David, the same story from Ed. And now granted, first time David's ever been on the lake, first time Ed's ever been on the lake. Ed fishes the Bass Nation stuff. David's just getting into tournament fishing. But we all hung out, drank some cold beverages and talked fishing, and then got our stuff prepped for the next day. So how did day 2 of practice go for you?
So day 2 started off, I went and picked up what I thought was going to be my ringer. And we went and run some spots that he knew, man. And we had a really good day 2. I mean, we would move around and we would do like everybody says, go to brush piles and just hop and hop and hop and hop. And when you're hopping brush piles and you're catching really good fish, I was like, dude, this is the ticket. I mean, I was like, man. But then talking to his buddy who actually Caden, who won it last year, and he's like, it don't matter what kind of pattern you get today, you don't get a pattern on Norman. Whatever you have today will not be the same tomorrow. And those words never rang more true. And I'm not going to jump into the day yet, but we had a good day, man. We caught fish. I mean, we thought we figured out a pattern. I'm texting Trey. I'm like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is literally how we're doing it. This is what we're throwing.
Yep.
And day 2 was phenomenal.
Yeah, didn't you catch like a couple 5-pound class largemouth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we 16, 17 pounds on day 2 on like 3 brush piles. So I'm like,
yeah,
40 marked. I mean, I think we're good.
Yeah. So yeah, and you guys were like, you didn't stay out there all day on Thursday, did you?
No, somebody after we caught so many fish wanted to go home at like 1:30 because he was like, look, man, we're just going to keep catching big fish. We need to save these for tomorrow. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go. So I dropped him off at the dock and I went back and marked a couple more. And then I came back. So
yeah.
Were the weather conditions different on day 2 than day 1, or some bluebird sky still?
There was hardly any wind on day 2.
Yeah.
But it was bluebird skies. And I would say, yeah, it was a lot more slack water. So they were hugged up on the cover like they should be. Day 2 of practice was like if you read a bass magazine about a clearer water fishery with not a bunch of ripple in the water, they had that pattern figured out. Like they were where they were supposed to be.
It was textbook. It was textbook. And all the while you're jacking 17 pounds of largemouth. I never stopped spinning out from day 1 of practice and tried to run a different brush pile dock pattern on that day and had virtually no success. Now, what I do need to note is Pete was there at this time. So Pete gets up there and he's running basically the same pattern that I am, but he's not having any success. And if anybody knows anything about Pete and Mike and basically everybody but me and probably you, I mean by Ben, is they are really good at fishing the dirt. And that's what Pete did. He abandoned everything and he went and found something. I mean, we're talking inches of water. And he hits me up and he's like, not all I'm going to tell you, but he's like, go fish the dirt. And I'm like, okay. So after Mike had already left from smashing all those fish that I wish I would have caught, I go probably the last hour that I was out there. And I'm going to tell you when I got really good at skipping docks was at this tournament. I mean, I can skip a dock now. And I started fishing the dirt. And and I started getting bites. And I think I set the hook on one and it was a non-keeper. So 2 days of practice for me, 3 keeper fish the entire time, virtually had nothing in my playbook for what was going to go down on Friday. So same thing. We get back to the house. Everyone's talking fishing. Good news is David actually caught his very first spotted bass in his life. So that was great. We hooped and hollered about that. I think Seth came over with his buddy that night, or maybe it was the first night. He also fished with a local on the lake who has a vast amount of knowledge. But that's the thing, right? So, and I want to talk to you before we get into the tournament. How crucial is dock talk, to listen to people talk about what they're doing, for you, Mike? Like, do you ever get wrapped up in that, or do you just kind of like push it off and do your own thing?
So I've had to learn over the years to push it off. I've had tournaments where it's really cost me. I can go back to one of the very first regional championships I made on Lake Lanier. And I was staying with a group of guys, and they were phenomenal offshore fishermen. And I found in the river on Lanier a really good largemouth bite. And I abandoned that to go chase spotted bass because they convinced me that spotted bass was going to win it. And that hurt. It really hurt me. I think I weighed 2 fish on day 1, and they were in my river pattern, but I had it in the back of my head when I only had 2 fish by noon to go chase offshore fish. But I had 2 fish for like 6 pounds, which is not a bad average on largemouth. And I left those fish to go chase spotted bass offshore, and I didn't catch another fish the rest of the day.
Oh.
And then on day 2, I was so wrapped up in the spotted bass pattern, I zeroed on day 2 in the championship because I was so wrapped up. Well, come to find out, the dude that finishes in 3rd place, guess where he was?
Fishing the river for largemouth.
Fishing the river. After day 2 away, and he goes, man, I saw you for those first couple hours on day 1 of the tournament. I didn't see you again. What happened? And I told him what happened. He said, nah, dude. He said, you're from Florida. So was he. And he's like, we're largemouth fishermen and river fishermen. He's like, man, and he's like, I'm not complaining because you gave me so much water to work by myself. But he's like, and then again, I really got really focused in on dock talk, and it got me. So I've had to really pay attention.
It's one of those things, like if you go to a new body of water, and I consider dock talk like, even kind of doing research, like you watch videos or read old magazines, these are the patterns on these lake this time of year. I mean, I think like Carolina Sportsman or whatever used to be called Outdoors, right?
Mm-hmm.
They, I don't know, they still publish it. But yeah, I used to pick up the magazine all the time, be like, okay, this lake is usually what they're on the pattern. And then you go out there and it doesn't work. So it's like, if you've never been in the lake before, and it's kind of like they gathering intel, but you got to be able to abandon that pretty quickly when it's not working. And 2, if it doesn't shoot your strengths. Yeah,
that's 100% right. Like, I don't think dock talk has ever gotten to me more than it did in this tournament. And, and it's not to discredit any of the local hammers, because they fish their strengths on their body of water, right? Like if they're saying like, hey, target, unless they were completely lying to me, which it was not the case. Like if they're like, hey, target these, brush piles that look like this on this type of dock. Well, they probably have 150 docks on that lake, but they're not going to tell you which dock. So you may run that pattern and just absolutely zero. And I wasn't comfortable doing that. That dock talk kicked my teeth in.
Do you think it's worse? Did you get spent out more in the dock talk after day 1 when you didn't have anything figured out?
After Mike told me that he whacked like multiple 4-pounders, and then on day 2 he whacked 5-pounders, and I'm like, I am either in the wrong area of the lake, throwing the wrong thing, targeting the wrong water depth. Like there is something I'm missing. Like it was one of those moments where you're like, nothing made sense to me. But here's my thing. Mike talked about those fish being textbook in slack water. right? Textbook, hiding up under brush piles to get the cover if they weren't under a dock, all that type of stuff. But what I should have remembered was what we talked about at the beginning, where the lake is like 4 feet high. Like Lake Norman has never been, at least that in years, has been at full pool before. It's always been down, right?
Yeah,
not terrible.
15 years. It's been full pool, I do believe.
Yeah. So now you got high water, which is new water for these fish to roam around, which is exactly what they were doing, by the way. And we'll get into it on tournament day. And I know how to fish shallow, but I choose to try to fish offshore because the majority of the population lives offshore. And it just bit me right in the butt. I mean, it really did. And so, yeah, I mean, that dock talk spun me out hardcore. And I attribute the tournament day to Pete just giving me that little sliver because everybody wanted to help each other out. Like we all wanted to do well because it's a charity tournament. We wanted the house to do well too. But it was just like, whatever Mike was telling me, like it wasn't clicking for me, right? Whatever Seth and his guy was telling me was not clicking for me. I was like, I can't put this together. Like I have no idea what's going on. So we get wrapped up for day 2 of practice. Pete's feeling pretty good. You're feeling really good, I'm assuming, Mike. Seth and his partner, they stayed in a different place. Seth fishes the MPFL. We've had him on here a number of times. They were feeling pretty confident. And, Ed and his wife, they went out and whacked a couple big spotted bass. And so for the most part, I think everyone was feeling kind of confident, but I was like, I have no idea what the heck I'm going to do. So
what happened then on Friday, right?
Yeah,
Friday. What
Friday, Mike, you want to open up? Like, what were the, first of all, like SOBA, great job on the blast off. We had over 60 boats, really big tournament. Major League Fishing donated their weigh-in trailer. You show up, you get registered, pay your entry fees, which is only $100. And they have the sheriff's department out there. They play the national anthem, and then they blast you off in boat order that you registered. But what did you notice about Friday that was different from Thursday and Wednesday's weather, Mike?
Well, first thing that morning was fog. It had cooled down Friday morning, so we were noticing that. And then looking at the weather, I knew it was going to be overcast. So I was like, I got really worried, and I was telling Jared, I was like, man, I don't think the offshore pattern is going to work. If it's overcast, they're not going to hug up offshore because they can roam all day in this vast water. Like, I'll be the first to admit, in deep water, I get very intimidated quickly because I'm not used to fishing. I mean, yeah, we got some deep spots in water, but I mean, take lakes like Okeechobee or Toho in the Kissimmee chain or Harris chain. I'm very comfortable in those lakes. The deepest spot on those lakes might be 15 feet.
Yeah.
Here it is. I'm running across spots that are 70, 80 foot deep and consistently 40 feet of water. So then I'm nervous. I'm like, bro, I'm ready to hyperventilate, breathe into a paper bag. Like, I'm like, man, I was like, I don't have a jerk bait that dives 40 feet. And so Jared's like, hey, we'll try to figure out, you got your pattern up north. I think that'll be better than running our south pattern that we had on Thursday. So we take off and was like, all right, boom, let's go north. And we went to the riprap. We saw some schoolers. I could not get them to bite. We'll talk about it more, but I'll mention the prop bait. I threw the prop bait in the middle of these schoolers. They would not touch it. I threw chatter baits and buzz baits.
Hang on a minute. There we go.
So I'm like, oh my God, man. I was like, what happened? I was like, what's going on? And he's doing the same thing. I mean, he's throwing walking baits. He's throwing little prop baits. We're throwing little crank baits, and they're not biting, but they're schooling. We see them schooling. I start scoping around, and you see just big balls of bait. And I'm like, oh, that's why. Unless you match the hatch perfectly, they're not touching anything.
Yeah.
And they were hitting these fish that were probably 2.5, 3 inches, little shad. I mean, they had like a really peculiar color. I will say a lot different than the shad we have in Florida, even not only size-wise, but color. It wasn't the pure white or the big, like, bright white silver shad I'm used to seeing. These fish had like I want to say almost like a purplish tint to them, like a little darker, almost like a bluegill tint to the fish. So I'm digging through my box. Jared, we're talking, and I'm like, we can't figure out. And then finally, of course, if you know Norman schoolers, they last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Max. I mean, well, actually 2 minutes, that's being gracious. 37 seconds, and they're gone. And then they just disappear. You won't see a fish for miles. I don't know what they do, like what portal they can go through after they but these fish just disappear. I mean, I'm scoping. I even turned my distance up to like 150 feet, and I'm scoping all around the boat. Like, where did these fish go? And they come up school, and they're gone.
Yeah.
And, man, so I'll say, and then Trey comes by me in the middle of this. What's going on? We had stopped. Trey was not far behind us. Yeah, I guess we passed you, and then you come by us.
Yeah, you guys were so. Yeah, I'll let you finish your thing, but I ran past you coming from a creek up the way from you. You guys were fishing on a shoal.
So anyway, we stopped there, and we don't catch a single fish. And so I'm like, well, we'll give it like 10 more minutes, and then I'll let you come in because that's where you come by me.
So yeah, so Mike is fishing up north. We were boat number 5. I think what were your boat number 7 or 12 or something like that?
6.
Oh yeah, you're right behind me. And so Pete's dad and myself, we ended up joining Pete Jr. We ended up joining Pete Jr. and Bradley Terry from Carolina Waters, who fished with Pete in this event. And, you know, Pete was like, hey, like, if you guys are trying to get a fish in the boat, like, there's a school up here, and it's got better than average fishing. And I was like, okay, we'll give that 1 hour, depending on how it works. And then we'll go run a shallow water pattern. And Mike is absolutely right. The shad that they were feeding on was microscopic shad. I want to say that the reason why they looked the way they did is because the water was dirtier. So they probably started to soak in some of that dirt into their I don't know, scales or whatever. So we started on up the way from Mike on a school. First cast, Pete's dad catches a 15-inch spot. Like very first cast, like didn't even see fish break in, nothing like, or, you know, he did see a fish break and he cast his little swim bait in there, catches a 15-incher. And Pete is about 150 yards down from me and they see this and they didn't catch anything off that spot. And then I just noticed it was just like dead, at least where we were at. So I said, I don't want to sit here and scope around for hours trying to catch, you know, 5 15-inch spotted bass. Not that I caught anything quality in practice by any means. So we ended up pulling the trolling motor up. I told Pete, I said, hey man, I'm going to go start running some new water. And so I said I was going to go check a school that was down close to Mike. That was on a flat that I saw a fly fisherman with his dog on the kayak during the practice. He was catching spots and hybrids and stuff like that, fly fishing. And I was like, well, let me go check and see if they're here. So I run past, and that's when I see you and Jared fishing that shoal. And I went back up into that flat. I dropped the trolling motor down, and then you guys ended up taking off and leaving. And it wasn't 2 minutes after you guys left, we ended up pulling trolling motor and leaving too. So where did you guys go from there? Like, what was your deal from there?
So from there, I said, look, I need a keeper in the boat to calm down. I get that way. I might seem cool, calm, and collective, but on tournament days, I get spun out really quick. So I said, let's go put a keeper in the boat. Let's go to my bridge at Long's Island. And we get to the bridge. I'm throwing a bait on the bridge. I catch a short. And then Jared's like, man, he's like, this looks like a really good jerk bait bite. He catches a short, then he catches a keeper. So now I'm like taking deep breaths. We got a keeper in the boat. I'm laughing because I'm like, man, I'm pretty sure this is how it happened last year. I think Pete come right out of the rip and caught the big fish of the tournament, like right off the rip. I can't remember. But anyway, I was like, all right, there it goes. Back of the boat already shows me up. He catches the keep. He catches our first keeper. Then for 45 minutes, we throw on these big fish roaming under the bridge and can't get a bite. And I was like, all right. So I decided to go back up to the river, or back out into the main river part, and fish the 2 little islands out by Long's Island. Jared catches another keeper on a jerkbait. I'm like, all right, well, there you go. We got a jerkbait pattern. So then it turned into me just running around. I would run to a spot, drop the trolling motor, start scoping around and telling Jared where to cast. Like, cast there. And he's flipping at fish. They'd bite. If they didn't bite, we'd move again. And we done that for another couple hours. It's getting later in the day. Then the sun comes out. It's been overcast this whole time. Now we're too far north to run our spot south. And I'm like, dang. Where did the sunlight come from? So we're like, well, what are you doing, Norman? The Lake of 1,000 Docks. Let's go target docks.
That's right.
We done the same thing, man. We'd pull up to a dock. I dropped the trolling motor, scan around. If we saw fish on it, we would cast at it. Ended up catching a couple more keepers. I think we ended up with 4 fish for 7 pounds, flipping jigs and spinner baits around docks. Could not get that 5th keeper, though. But, yeah, that's how we finished off our day, just hopping dock to dock. And in the last hour or hour and a half, I would pull up to a dock and position the boat where the back of the boat was perfectly angled and say, hey, 3rd pylon past the boat. He's sitting on the pylon, and Jared would cast at it. And that was the plan we come up. We were doing the teamwork. I was calling it in, and he was my fire support. So,
I mean, spoken like a true forward observer right there. So, but I mean, now listen, everyone listening to this, you're like, oh, 7 pounds, but let me, and I'll just tell you this, the difference between a 24th place finish and a 10th place finish was like 1.75 pounds, right? Like that's how tight the weights were. So, I'll go into the rest of my day and then we'll wrap it up with some lessons learned here. But so after you had left and went and ran your pattern, Pete's dad and I was like, you know what? We're not doing this. We're not looking for schooling fish at all. If they come up on the side of the boat, we're going after them. I said, but I'm going to go do what I'm not comfortable doing at all, which is fishing docks, specifically fishing the shallowest part of the dock, which means you have to maneuver your boat properly. You have to skip your jig or Texas rig. And that was the one thing that I noticed, and Pete kind of keyed us in on that, is like, you got those who are out in the lake that are eating shad, but then you had brim eaters, right? And those brim eaters were both spots and largemouth. And when I tell you that there were 18 to 20 pounds worth of spots swimming in a group up in 3 foot of water, there was absolutely that. So we went and ran brand new water. No, we didn't even, I had no lines in this stuff. And Pete's dad ended up catching like a 16-inch spot, flipping a jig. I caught a short largemouth, and I switched over to a Texas rig, something that mimicked almost to the close size of the brim that were on the bank. There's a great bait for that. It's called the Nighthawk, right? So between the Nighthawk and another style of creature bait, I was skipping a 3/8 ounce Texas rig with a 3/0 flipping hook all the way to the back where the walkway started from the bank. And when it would fall down, you'd make one pop, and that's where you'd get bit. But it wasn't on every dock. And that comes into play later. So we run, and I find this dock, and it had no floating buoys on it. It was a straight timber dock with a tin roof on it. And I was like, I flipped under the dock at the walkway, didn't get bit. Then I flipped at the second pillar, didn't get bit. And then I flipped at the third one. And when I did that, almost a 3-pound largemouth I connected with. And when I hit that largemouth and I was bringing him to the boat, he had 4 or 5 of his friends with him. And they were 3+ pound class fish. And I was like, holy crap. Like, did we just find the magical hot dock? You know what I mean? And I must have we had a limit of fish in the boat by 10 o'clock that morning. And I was like, I can't believe this. How many times do you hear anglers talk about having an absolute disaster of a practice, and then they go out that day and they whack them, and then vice versa? Mike just talked about it. They had phenomenal practice and they go out and they're like, what the heck just happened? Right. So we're sitting on 5 fish at like 10:30. Seth calls me. He's like, what's going on? And I was like, man, we got 5. And he was like, really? Well, his trolling motor took a crap, so they were dead in the water. Oh. I think they had 2 fish in the box or whatever. And Pete Senior and I ended up running that pattern legitimately all day long. I think we called 2 or 3 times. We must have revisited that hot dock probably 6 times that day. I ended up flipping up into the shallows to this other dock and got hung up in like a telephone cord. And when I brought my boat up there, 5 giant spotted bass just come swimming out. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, so we ended the day fishing just all new water and then repeating some docks, got on a pattern of a certain type of timber dock, had the exact bait that they wanted. Yeah, man, came in and had almost 9 pounds and had a 24th place finish, which we weren't worried about the finishes as much as we were about just catching 5 on Lake Norman. And come to find out, the tournament itself was won down south. Right? The place that you didn't go, the creek that I practiced in day 1 for about 15, 20 minutes. Oh, we were probably down there for a couple hours. And it was one in that exact creek that we fished last year and the creek that I practiced this year. The winners had, a little over 17 pounds. They caught them, on a buzz bait and a jig. And it was just like and maybe you can speak to this, Mike, but the lake was fishing different almost in every single creek you went.
Yeah. And every day,
every day.
And I'll even add, what did we do out Saturday? We all went fun fishing.
Yep.
And then I caught everything on top water and on a jig offshore on shoals.
Yeah.
On a swim jig, might have you. That I didn't get a bite on in practice, or top water that I didn't get all overcast during the tournament. Not one top water bite.
Nope.
Bird skies, and I catch top water fish. I'll let Trey tell the story about me fishing behind him and Pete Senior with a bait. If you want to give the juice, I'll let you give the juice, Trey.
Yeah. Well, they can't find it.
Yeah. I'll text you a link. I did find some, and
okay.
I'll in today. That might have been all they had, but I ordered 10 more, so I'll give you a couple. But anyway, so I'm fishing docks behind Pete and Trey here. They're on the other side of the dock fishing towards me. I'm fishing towards them under the same dock, and I start catching fish on this particular bait. It was ridiculous. Come to find out, the bait I'm talking about, they still make the bait, but they don't make the color anymore. I had to go to eBay and find the bait. But I did find them, and I bought 10 of them. I don't know if the guys got any more in stock, but anyway.
Yeah, so tournament wraps up. Everyone's weighing in. Obviously, congratulations to the winners, but everyone's a winner in that event. You're donating your money to a great cause. SOBA did a great job at, the raffle ticket events. There was a lot of great merchandise that was raffled off. They had hot foots and graphs and all sorts of stuff, lots of baits. Our friends that drove down from Jersey, they won a bunch of random baits and stuff like that were donated by different sponsors. So they ran that. We went back to the house that night. I think we ordered pizza that night because everyone was so freaking burned out. Ate some pizza and said, you know what? These guys drove down from Jersey. Mike drove up from Georgia. We're going to go out on Saturday. We're going to fun fish, right? Because we're there anyways. So yeah, we go out on Saturday And it was so funny, man. Like we tell Ed, Ed was on a good bag. He brought like a 4-pound spotted bass back to the scales. I think they weighed in 2 fish, but heck, they had like 6.5 pounds for 2 fish, which is good on Lake Norman. And so we were like, hey, let's just run to where they were schooling at yesterday for Ed. And he's like, yeah, let's all do it. So you got 5 boats flying like NASCAR drivers at this shoal in the southern end of the lake. Mind you, there's a giant tournament that put out at Queen's Landing, so we weren't going to put in there, even though we were 5 seconds from the ramp. So we fly up on this shoal, and again, windy conditions today, like pretty good wind. They were not schooling on those shoals, and it wasn't 20 minutes later that everyone kind of went their own way. We went fun fishing, and Pete Sr. and myself rolled up on a spot, and as soon as I cut the big motor off, they started busting on top of the water. I caught 7 in a row on a spook. And I'm like, well, where was this yesterday? And then we started targeting some docks, and we just sat there and caught schoolers all day. I dropped a pin. Well, then Mike shows up later on in the day, and I kid you not, dude, and I learned so much. I threw a whopper plopper. I threw a jig. I threw a Texas rig. Pete's dad was throwing a pop R, and Mike would come right behind us with a prop bait and catch a largemouth. I mean, literally targeting the exact same spot. And that showed me right there that I need to order, a Pete style version of 500 of them and clear the shelves. But that's how finicky those fish were, how dialed in to a certain bait they were, specifically under the docks, though, because we could catch them out in the open on anything, to include the OneCast Fishing weedless Ned in 25 foot of water. But when it got to those docks, Mike was laying the hammer down.
Do you think that, so the prop bait's a traditional Florida style bait?
It is, right? Yeah.
I don't think I've only bought them because when I went to Florida, so I've only probably tried them once or twice out of my box, like on the lakes run. I just don't think they get thrown as much up here.
Well, and that's exactly
it's not typical prop bait, though. It's not the double prop. It's not I won't give out too much because it's a really good bait, and I'll probably be making an announcement later this year. I'm probably gonna join a circuit this year and for next season, and because I don't want to give out that bait, because there's 3 lakes that'll play really good for me on.
Yeah.
So I really don't want to give out that juice. But it's a prop bait. It's not your typical prop bait. I'll just leave it at that. But
yeah,
it's a little more subtle than the real aggressive, like double props.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fish a lot of prop baits, you probably know what I'm talking about. But it's just, yeah. I mean, I've caught fish from... Well, heck, I caught them on Champlain on that same bait. I even caught a couple when we were at in Virginia this year when we were on Potomac.
Yep.
I've caught a couple fish when I fished the MPFL on Hartwell with it. Now I've caught them on Norman. I've caught them all over Florida. I've caught them on Eufaula on the same bait. That bait is universal from the north end of the United States to the south end.
So if you get that bait hung in a tree and you can't reach it, you're just going to cut that tree down?
Yes. I will carry a chainsaw until I get these other baits in from this eBay seller. I will carry a chainsaw on the boat. And yes, if you see me on a live and they're like, this crazy angler is cutting a tree down, know that my bait is in that tree.
Well, before we wrap it up here, I want to talk about some lessons learned, get Mike's perspective on it, and and I'll share some of my perspective. But all in all, a charity tournament for a great cause. Everybody had a great time, but we learned something every single time we're on the water, whether we're catching fish or not catching fish. And so from this tournament, Mike, being a dock lake, being over 40,000 acres, being a relatively clear body of water for the most part, what would you say, like maybe your top 2 biggest things that you learned from this tournament were?
I would say the biggest thing is how, I guess I always think about northern lakes. The fish don't change as much as they do in Florida. So Florida's a lot of dirty water, and those fish move repeatedly. Patterns can change. It gets So I will say that with this deeper water and this clearer water, I won't say clear because, like you said, it was not as clear as it normally is. The pattern changed from day to day. And even in Florida, I don't see that often. Usually you get a couple days with a pattern, but I'll say I learned that you better just have 30 rods on the deck and go firing, because if it worked on one day of practice, it might work again or not work again the next day. I mean, so
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing I learned is be very versatile and don't get don't get that tunnel vision on something that worked the day before. I think that was my problem for sure.
Yeah.
I locked in. I got tunnel vision, and that'll be my biggest takeaway from that tournament was don't get tunnel vision and keep throwing different things. So
Yeah. Well, and we always talk about fall fishing as fall fishing, even though it didn't feel like fall. Definitely during day 1 and day 2 of practice, it felt like summertime to me. I mean, it was hot, it was slick, there was no wind.
It was, I mean, just the weather around here, it's been set up like that early fall transition when it does really, fishing is junk.
Yep.
I think that got extended a lot this year.
It did. And the one thing about that water too, that definitely happened is it turned over. Like it still may be hot, but it definitely turned over. And I can't remember, I think it was Brandon Polinick that said it. And it was something that I didn't do in practice at all, which he always says, eliminate the shallow water first. And now I think that's true for the most part, unless you're talking like super offshore, like straight up summer fishing where they're schooling at and you don't have to do that. But it couldn't have been more true. And the biggest thing that I learned, and this goes for North Carolina in general, but I think it's probably true for a lot of places, is no matter how shallow you think it is, like sometimes you think it's too shallow for fish. It's not too shallow for fish. Like even if you can see the bottom, you may think like there's no way they could be there. It's too shallow. I'm not even going to give it a try. I'm here to tell you the biggest thing that I learned from that fishery, specifically that fishery, is if you can see the bank, like they very, very well could be in that mud. And that's where majority of my fish came from. Like when they say fish the mud, I mean fish the mud. And that's my biggest takeaway. And if it wasn't for Pete's dad and I love team tournaments, of course, man, I'll tell you what, like you can spin out really quickly. And if it wasn't for somebody else in the boat with me, I think I would have spun out a heck of a lot quicker. So a lot of good lessons learned from that charity tournament, man. And I implore anyone that is looking to do something like that and, for a great cause, like come on down to Lake Norman next year. They're going to host it again. It's always the Friday before Veterans Day. It's a great time, great camaraderie and fellowship, run very well. And I did tell Nick this, Mike. I said huge sustain from this year was having that sheriff's deputy out there stopping traffic so we could pull out onto that road with our boat.
That's funny. I mean, that was phenomenal. Even Jared said, because he left a little earlier than the raffle had ended, because he's like, man, I want to get out of here before the madness. And when he said he felt bad then when he saw the sheriff deputy stopping cars, because he was like, oh, I could have stayed. But yeah, Nick made a good call with getting them to help out or, whatever. So that was awesome.
Yeah. Well, yeah, man, we appreciate you jumping on here and stay on after we end the show. But real quick, Mike's been on the show before. We always talk about FX3 and stuff like that, but I'm going to let him run that down. Where can everybody find you at, and how can they support FX3 and all the initiatives that you have?
For sure. I'll start off on like a little bit of a rant for just a second. Not even a rant, but it's like a message. I just want to remind everyone you're never alone. I know that life kind of gets at us sometimes and we feel overwhelmed and like things can come at you. I want you to remember you're never alone. I give my number out all the time, and that's 912-270-3726. There's also 800 number, 1-800-273-8255, or you can text 988. On social media, you can reach me at FX3INC. That's on Instagram. That's on Twitter. That's on Facebook. On Facebook, you can reach me at Mike Johns. And just never forget, you can go on our website also. That's www.fx3inc.org. But never forget, no matter what life's throwing at you, there's always somebody here. I promise you. You can call me at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to answer. If I don't answer, I'll call you right back. It might take me a minute to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning because I'm on retired time now, but I'm going to call you right back. But never think that you got to walk through everything yourself. And I tell this a lot, and I've had people ask me, it's like, what's calling you going to do? When you call me, no, I can't fix your problems. When you call me, no, I can't make everything go away. I can't make your pain stop. I can't make your heart not hurt, and I can't make your head get clear. But all I can do is hold your hand, and I can stand there with you while I do it. And I would rather, and this is 1,000% anybody that knows me, I would rather talk to you on the phone in the middle of the night and cry, or talk with you in person and cry, than I got to stand in front of a bunch of people at your funeral and listen to your death. So never forget that. I'm always here for you. You're never alone. fx3inc.org.
No, we appreciate that, Mike. We're huge advocates of the veteran community. Obviously, we're all veterans in this room right now. And it, that magic saying, it takes a village, and that couldn't be more true. And then some people may be asking, well, Trey, Ben, Mike, how do you deal with it? If you're always, if people are always calling you or whatever, this is how we deal with it right here. We talk to each other, we fish with each other. We have that camaraderie, that fellowship, because it weighs heavy on all of us too. And the only way we can do anything about it is to talk to each other about it. So there's the challenge for all of you veterans that are out there, or anybody that's out there struggling with any sort of trauma, make the phone call. We're a phone call away. You can reach any of us anytime. And if we don't answer, we will get back to you. Mike Johns, we appreciate you breaking that down. Hang on a minute. You've been a fantastic friend, comrade, and you're one of the people that we always talk about, who's the epitome of helping us grow a culture of anglers, helping anglers one cast at a time.